In this video, we're going to take a look at this fantastic 1966 30-year-old Springbank bottling from the 1990s. Now, this has got to be one of my favourite bottles that we've got listed at the moment for one of our clients. It's a Springbank 1966, bottled in 1996, cask number 1648. So it's a very rare 30-year-old Springbank. And the Springbank distillery is sort of one that's quite close to my heart, really. It's got a few unique characteristics as well that make it, quite fun from sort of like a facts and figures perspective. It's the only 19th century, or it's the only distillery established in the 19th century that is still owned by the same family today. And it was set up in 1828 by William Reed in Campbelltown. And Campbelltown, of course, was the whiskey capital of the world, at one point having over 30 distilleries in operation. But in the 1920s, it's over a dozen of them closed, and today we only have 3 distilleries active in Campbelltown. And the Springbank distillery itself has been in troubles or decided to close for whatever reasons. I think it closed from 1926 to 1933 or thereabouts, and again in 1979 to 1987. So the distillery's been on and off with its production over the decades, but still it is really one of the most sought after distilleries by collectors on the secondary market. And it's not just because of the quality of the releases, but they've always been very forward thinking with their releases as well. So take, for instance, the 1919 50-year-old that we're going to make a video about because it's such a fascinating bottle. That was a 50-year-old bottle of single malt released in 1970. You've got to remember that the Balvenie and Macallan didn't release their 50-year-olds until the 1980s. So they're a good decade or so before these, what we would class as the bigger distilleries today, making these seminal releases. Now, there are 5 things that make this bottle really special in my mind, and that's the age statement, the vintage, the release year, the scarcity of the bottle, and also the quality of whiskey inside it. So first of all, before we take a look at those points, let's take a look at the bottle itself. Now, anyone familiar with Springbank bottlings from the 1990s will immediately recognise this dumpy shaped bottle. You've got a gold wax sort of seal here embossed with an intaglio of the distillery. You've got your basic gold capsule with your Springbank Gothic S on top. And then you've got one of a few different variants of the label look on the front here. This one's got like a marbled paper effect, and most of these labels from the 1990s have this lovely gilding all over the label. And on the back of this one, we've got just a small back label, but importantly it tells us the cask number. So taking a look at the bottle itself, we've got the vintage year here, 1966, or distilled in May 1966 and bottled in November 1996, and distilled or bottled at 46% ABV and 70 centilitres. So it's a really attractive bottle. I don't believe these came with boxes originally, but I'll happily be corrected. And this bottle itself, as you can see, has got a fantastic level for a bottle of this age, and that really shows that the storage conditions that this bottle's been in previously, because the owner of this has just taken it out of bond for us to help him sell it. So looking first of all at the age statement, obviously it's a 30-year-old whiskey, and that in itself is quite scarce in a way. There's only 18 official 30-year-old Springbank releases according to the details that are on Whiskey Bases, and oddly enough 10 of these are from the 1966 vintage. You've got another from the 1965, another from the 1962, and then 13 other variants of non-vintage statements. So this has sort of like the benefit of, as well as being a very high age statement, so 30 years old, it's also got the vintage declaration on it. And Springbank have done a lot of work with 1965 and 1966 vintages, mostly with the local barleys. I think there's 17 or so from the 1965 vintage, but a phenomenal 56 releases from the 1966 vintage, and this one included. So at the time, Springbank had great foresight to lay down these reserves of casks and leave them untouched using local barley. Now, this isn't one of the local barley series, but to have such a depth of range there is incredible. And you know, we've got to think what was happening in 1966. Obviously the Euros are happening at the moment, and England won the World Cup, of course, in 1966. You know, Action Man was released in 1966. The Beatles played their last concert, and you know, the Beatles also, a bit of a Beatles fan in case you hadn't noticed, they started recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, whose cover was of course done by Peter Blake, which we've also done a video about the Macallan Peter Blake releases. Having been distilled in 1966 and left for 30 years in a single cask, it was bottled in 1996. Now 1996 is an interesting year for the distillery from my perspective, because another thing that we do for clients is help people exit their cask investments. You know, we help people sell their casks, and at the time Springbank had their own cask ownership scheme. So for around £1,500 in the year from about 1990 to the year 2000, you could have bought a cask of Springbank directly from the distillery, and I mean, goodness me, that would have been quite an investment on your behalf, because you know, those casks of 1996 Springbank that you would have bought for say £1,500 back in the day are in the region of sort of 40, 50, 60, 70,000 pounds in today's market, even just working on a barrel or a hogshead. Double those for if you've got a butt. So through the 1990s, Springbank really took to expanding their range, and you get new releases of the 21, the 25 and the 30-year-old. Of course, this is one of the 30-year-olds that came out in the 1990s, and it's also a time that the country was sort of going through some changes. You know, Take That split up, causing schoolgirls everywhere to break down in tears. Charles and Diana got divorced, and Germany also won the Euros. So to be honest with you, 1996 was a pretty terrible year, although it was the year that I started secondary school. So if anyone can guess my age from that, comment below. So finally we get down to the quality of the whisky itself, and these 30-year-old Springbanks and also these 1966 Springbanks have got a phenomenal reputation. If you look on Whiskyfun, we refer to Whiskyfun a lot, and it's because it's like the single most respected source of whisky tastings on the web. So if you've not looked at Whiskyfun, make sure you do. And one of the Springbank local barleys, the 1966 casks, I think it was cask number 443, it's got a whopping 96 points on Whiskyfun, and to get up into those dizzy heights above 95 is almost unheard of, and the fact that it came from a 1966 single cask is quite phenomenal. And you look at some of the other 30-year-olds, again on Whiskyfun, you can find there's a review for one of the non-specific casks, so one of the standard 30-year-olds that was released in the 1990s of this Springbank, and I think they got 94 points as well. So the quality of whisky is really, really high. And then finally we get down to the last point, which is always going to have a big bearing on value, and that is the scarcity of the bottle. And we looked on Whiskey Hunter, and we can only find 10 recorded sales of this Springbank 30-year-old from cask 1648, and the last one wasn't until 2018, and it achieved about £3,300, and the level was below the neck. So this is a really rare and sought after bottle. Not only is it a high age statement, so a 30-year-old age statement, but it's got a distillation vintage on here, 1966, which again, it has other reasons to be special other than just the whiskey, but importantly the whiskey and the quality of whiskey produced from these 1966 casks seems to be phenomenal. It's got a bottling month and a bottling year, so further hooks to tie onto, and it's a single cask bottling. You couple that with how scarce these bottles are on the secondary market, this could be a very, very good addition to your collection. Now, we're selling it on behalf of a client. I think we've got the asking price just over £7,000 at the moment, and if you're interested in this bottle, or if you've got bottles that you want to sell, or you're interested in starting a collection, please get in touch and visit the website where we've got lots of articles, and we'll be happy to help.